A guilt-ridden tycoon watched his unconscious daughter in the hospital bed. He deeply regretted not being as present as he should have been. Suddenly, a parrot enters the room and utters impressive words. The businessman breaks down in tears, unable to believe what he hears. Before learning about this moving story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Robert Thompson adjusted his Italian silk tie while observing New York City from his office on the 45th floor. The reflection in the bulletproof glass showed a 50-year-old man, meticulously trimmed graying hair, and a custom-tailored suit that cost more than an economy car. His deep brown eyes carried the weight of countless negotiations and victories in the corporate world. His cell phone vibrated for the 5th time that morning. It was Sarah, his ex-wife, probably calling to talk about Emily, their 16-year-old daughter whom he barely knew. He ignored the call. He had an important meeting with Chinese investors in 10 minutes and couldn't afford family distractions. "Mr. Thompson, the representatives from Chang Industries have arrived," announced his secretary over the intercom. "Send them in 5 minutes," he replied, adjusting his shirt cuffs. As he organized the documents on his black marble desk, his thoughts briefly wandered to his last encounter with Emily 3 months ago during a rushed lunch. She had tried to show him her drawings, talking excitedly about an art exhibition at school, but he was more concerned with the messages constantly arriving on his phone. The intercom buzzed again. "Mr. Thompson, your ex-wife is on line 1. She says it's urgent." Robert huffed in irritation. "Tell her I'm going into a meeting." "She insists it's about Emily, sir. She seems very nervous." Something in his secretary's voice made him hesitate. In 20 years of working together, Carol had never shown concern for his personal matters. "Put her through," he finally conceded. Sarah's voice came through, choked on the other end of the line. "Robert, Emily, she had an accident. We're at Mount Sinai Hospital." The world seemed to freeze. Sarah's following words reached him as if through a distant tunnel. Something about Emily fainting during physical education class. A fall, head trauma. "I'm on my way there," was all he managed to say before hanging up. He left the office like a hurricane, ignoring Carol's protests about the meeting with the Chinese. In the elevator, his hands trembled as he typed a message to his lawyer to handle the situation with the investors. On the way to the hospital, memories assaulted him mercilessly. Emily learning to walk, her first drawings on the refrigerator, the last birthday he attended. She was only 8 years old. After that, he always sent expensive gifts with cards signed by his secretary. When he arrived at the hospital, he found Sarah in the reception area. Her red eyes and marked face betrayed hours of crying. "Where is she?" he asked, feeling his heart pounding in his chest. "In the ICU. The doctors are with her now," Sarah replied, her voice trembling. "She's in a coma, Robert." The word hit him like a punch to the stomach. Coma. His daughter, his little Emily, was in a coma. His entire corporate empire, his international bank accounts, his political contacts, none of that mattered now. For the first time in decades, Robert Thompson felt completely powerless. That's when he noticed something unusual. A vibrantly colored parrot perched near the waiting room window. It was Max, the pet parrot he had given Emily on her last present birthday, another failed attempt to make up for his absence with expensive gifts. "What's he doing here?" he asked, confused. "Emily never separates from him," Sarah explained. "When they brought her in, he came along in the car. No one could make him go back home." Robert approached the window, observing the bird. For a moment their gazes met, and he could swear he saw something different in those black, shiny eyes, something almost human. The night dragged on in the ICU corridor. Robert remained seated in the same uncomfortable chair for hours, alternating between moments of anguish and brief, restless naps. Sarah had gone home to take a shower and fetch some things for Emily, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the peculiar parrot, who refused to leave the hospital. Through the glass, he observed his daughter's pale face, connected to various machines that monitored her vital signs. The doctors had explained that the head trauma had caused cerebral edema, and the next 48 hours would be crucial for her recovery. His cell phone wouldn't stop vibrating with messages and missed calls. The cancelled meeting with the Chinese was causing a real corporate earthquake. For the first time in his life, Robert didn't care about the millions he could lose. "Sir?" a young nurse called him gently. I need to perform some procedures in the room. Could you wait in the waiting room for a few minutes? Robert nodded, getting up with difficulty. His back ached from sitting in the same position for so long. In the waiting room, he found Max perched near the window, observing the illuminated city outside. He sat down close to the parrot, feeling strangely comforted by its presence. It was Emily's pet, after all, something that was part of her daily life, unlike himself. "You must spend more time with her than I do," he muttered to the bird, more to himself than expecting an answer. To his surprise, Max turned his head in his direction and spoke with impressive clarity. "You're going to lose everything." Robert felt a chill run down his spine. He knew parrots could repeat words, but there was something disturbing about the way Max pronounced that phrase. "What did you say?" he asked, leaning forward. "He's coming back," Max responded, his black eyes fixed on Robert. Before he could process what was happening, his cell phone rang. It was Carol, his secretary. "Mr. Thompson, I'm sorry to bother you, but the Chinese, they're threatening to cancel the entire project. It's $200 million in investments." "Carol," he interrupted her, "my daughter is in a coma. For the first time in my life, I don't care about money." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. In 20 years, he had never spoken to her like that. He hung up the phone and turned his attention back to Max, but the parrot was now silent, as if he had never uttered those enigmatic words. A flash of memory hit him. Emily, at 6 years old, asking him to play with her. "Just 5 minutes, Dad." He was busy with an important video conference. "Later, sweetie. Now Daddy needs to work." Always later, always work, always money. Max suddenly flew closer, landing on the backrest of the chair next to Robert. "Time is running out," said the parrot, with frightening clarity. Robert felt his heart racing. This couldn't be normal. Parrots repeated phrases they heard, but these words, they were too specific, too contextual. The nurse returned. "Mr. Thompson, you can come back now." As he stood up, his legs were shaking. Max's words echoed in his mind. "You're going to lose everything. He's coming back. Time is running out." He returned to Emily's side, observing her young and serene face. On the wall of the room, there was a drawing she had made, a colorful self-portrait full of life. Next to the signature, a small note, "To the best dad in the world, even when he's too busy to see my drawings." The tears, which he had held back for so long, finally began to fall. The dawn found Robert still in the hospital, his red eyes fixed on the window of Emily's room. The reflection in the glass showed a different man from the one who used to admire himself from the top of his office. The wrinkled suit, the loose tie, the unshaven face. For the first time in years, his appearance was the least of his concerns. Sarah returned, bringing a backpack with Emily's belongings, her diary, some drawing pencils, and a small photo album. "I thought she would like to have these things nearby when she wakes up," she said, hesitating on the last part. Robert took the album with trembling hands. The first pages showed moments he recognized: first and second birthday parties, Christmases as a family, walks in the park. As he progressed, his presence in the photos diminished, until it disappeared completely. The last images were all of Emily with her mother, with school friends, with Max. "She won several art awards this year," Sarah commented, breaking the heavy silence. "She had an individual exhibition at school last month. I sent an invitation to your office." Robert closed his eyes, remembering the pink invitation that had arrived along with the business correspondence. He had asked Carol to send flowers on his behalf, as he always did. Max, who remained in the room despite the occasional protests from the medical team, let out a sharp chirp. "Flowers wilt, Dad." Sarah widened her eyes. "Since when does he say that?" "He's been saying strange things since yesterday," Robert replied, feeling a chill. "Phrases that seem directed at me." As if to confirm his words, Max flew to the inner windowsill and clearly pronounced, "The mirror will break." One of the monitors connected to Emily emitted a different beep, making both parents jump in fright. A nurse quickly entered the room, checked the devices, and made some notes. "It's normal," she assured. "The vital signs remain stable." When they were alone again, Robert opened Emily's diary. The pages were filled with incredible drawings, portraits, landscapes, scenes from everyday life. Among them, he found an especially impactful one, A man in a suit, sitting alone in a mirrored room, surrounded by piles of money, but with a void in place of his heart. On the facing page, Emily had written, "Sometimes I wonder if Dad knows that there are things money can't buy. Like time, like love, like the moments we never lived together." "She has your talent," Sarah commented, looking over his shoulder. "The same observational ability, the same attention to detail. Only she uses these gifts to create art, not to close deals." Robert felt as if each word was a needle in his chest. He remembered his own father, a rigid and distant man who had raised him to be a winner in the business world. He was repeating the same pattern, perpetuating the same cycle of absence and emotional coldness. "Patterns repeat themselves," Max suddenly spoke, his voice strangely melodious. "This has to stop," Robert murmured, closing the diary. "If she wakes up." "When?" Sarah firmly corrected him. "When she wakes up." "When she wakes up," he agreed. "Everything will be different. I promise." At that moment, he noticed a slight movement in Emily's fingers. It was so subtle that he could have imagined it, but his heart raced anyway. "Doctor," Sarah called, running to the corridor. Max flew to the headboard of Emily's bed, his black eyes fixed on her. "Time is coming back," said the Parrot, and for the first time his voice sounded hopeful. The movement in Emily's fingers had not been an illusion, the neurologist confirmed after a battery of tests, but it also didn't necessarily mean an immediate recovery. "These are natural reflexes," he explained, "but it's a positive sign. The brain is responding." That small hope was enough for Robert to decide to do something he had never done in his entire career. He took an indefinite leave from the company. The news caused a real earthquake in the financial market. Mendonça Enterprises shares plummeted 12% in a single day. "The board is in panic," Carol informed over the phone. "They're calling an extraordinary meeting for tomorrow." "Let them call it," Robert replied, watching Emily through the glass. "My daughter is more important than any board." It was now dawn. Sarah had gone to rest a bit at home, leaving Robert alone with Emily and Max. The Parrot was especially agitated, flying from one side of the room to the other, his colourful wings reflecting the dim light of the monitors. "What are you trying to tell me?" Robert asked the bird, feeling a bit foolish for expecting a coherent answer. Max landed on the back of the chair and tilted his head. "The walls have memory." Robert frowned. "What memories?" In response, the Parrot flew to the bedside table where Emily's diary was. With his beak, he skillfully turned a few pages until he reached a specific drawing. It was a sequence of frames, like a comic strip, showing a little girl waiting by the window. In each frame, the girl aged a bit, but kept waiting. "Emily," Robert whispered, recognizing the story the drawing told. How many times had he promised to come home early, spend time with her, only to cancel at the last minute? "Time doesn't come back," Max said, his voice carrying an almost human sadness. "But it can go on differently," Robert replied, surprising himself. At that moment, his cell phone vibrated. It was a message from the chairman of the board. "Robert, be reasonable. The company needs you. We're talking about a lifetime's work." As he stared at the screen, a sudden memory hit him. Emily, at 12, winning her first art award at school. He had promised to be there, but an important negotiation in London prevented him. He sent a bouquet of expensive roses with an apology card. "The flowers wilted, Dad?" Max repeated his earlier phrase, as if reading his thoughts. Robert stood up and walked to the window. New York City shimmered outside, an artificial constellation of lights and skyscrapers. His empire was among those buildings, a lifetime's work, as the chairman of the board said. But there, reflected in the hospital window glass, he saw something different. He saw the man from Emily's drawing, the one with the void in place of his heart. He saw his own father, always absent, always busy. He saw the cycle he was perpetuating. "Mr. Thompson," a nurse called him softly. "I brought you some coffee." "Thank you," he replied, realizing he hadn't eaten anything in hours. As he drank the coffee, he noticed something new in the room. Emily had been surrounded by her drawings, which Sarah had brought from home. The white, sterile walls now told stories in vibrant colors, stories of a life he barely knew. "Art is life," Max pronounced, landing near one of the drawings. Robert picked up his cell phone again and typed a response to the chairman of the board. The company will survive without me. My daughter can't wait any longer." Max gently flapped his wings and flew to Robert's shoulder. "The mirror is starting to crack," said the parrot, but this time his voice didn't sound like a warning but like a promise. The dawn of the third day brought a subtle change to the hospital room. Emily's drawings, now covering practically all the walls, seemed to come to life under the golden light entering through the window. Robert, who hadn't slept, observed how the colors seemed to dance, creating shadows and reflections that transformed the sterile environment into an improvised art gallery. "Has she always drawn like this?" he asked Sarah, who had just arrived with a breakfast he probably wouldn't touch. "Since she was little," she replied, adjusting some drawings that had come loose from the wall. "Remember when she covered her bedroom walls with crayon? You were furious." Robert remembered. Emily was 5 years old at the time. He had yelled about the imported wallpaper from Italy, about discipline, about boundaries. Now, looking back, he realized how much talent there was in those childish scribbles that had irritated him so much. "Oh, you need to see this," called a nurse who had just checked Emily's vital signs. "Her brain activity has increased significantly in the last few hours." Robert and Sarah approached the monitors, trying to understand the graphs and numbers flashing on the screen. Max, who had been unusually quiet since the previous night, suddenly flew to the headboard of Emily's bed. "The colors are coming back," announced the parrot, his voice clear and melodious. As if responding to the bird's words, Emily's fingers moved again, this time with more strength. Her eyes, though still closed, showed movement under the eyelids. "Is this normal?" Robert asked the doctor, who had just entered the room. "These are promising signs," replied the specialist, examining Emily's pupils with a small flashlight. "The brain is showing more activity. Keep talking to her, show her you're here." Robert pulled a chair closer to the bed and, for the first time since arriving at the hospital, really started talking to his daughter. Not about business, not about expectations or disappointments, but about her drawings. "This one," he said, holding up a watercolor portrait, "is impressive, Emily. The way you captured the light in the model's eyes, it reminds me of Rembrandt." Sarah looked at him in surprise. "I didn't know you understood art." "My mother was a restorer," he revealed without taking his eyes off the drawing. Before she passed away, she taught me a lot about classical art. But after she was gone, my father said art didn't pay the bills." Max flew to a specific drawing on the wall, a portrait of a woman with long hair and a gentle smile. "Memory lives in colors," said the parrot. Robert stood up, approaching the drawing. It was his mother. Emily had never met her, but somehow had captured her essence through old photographs. "She has the same gift as you," Sarah commented softly, "of seeing beyond the surface." At that moment, a soft sound filled the room, a melody coming from Emily's. At that moment, a soft sound filled the room, a melody coming from Emily's cell phone, which was on the table. It was the alarm she set every morning to go to school. "The colors of the morning," Theo sang, flying in circles around the room. And then, as if the melody was a magic key unlocking a door, Emily's eyes began to slowly open. First a crack, then a little more, until her gaze met her father's. Dad?" Her voice came out weak, almost a whisper. Robert felt his legs weaken. Sarah ran to call the medical team, while Theo landed softly on the foot of the bed, his colorful feathers shining brightly under the morning light. "I'm here, sweetheart," Robert replied, holding Emily's hand, "and I'm not going anywhere." "You came to see my drawings?" she asked, still confused. The tears finally came, without any resistance. "I came to see all of them," he replied, "each one of them, and they're the most important works I've ever seen in my entire life." The days following Emily's recovery were an emotional roller coaster. The doctors performed constant exams, ensuring there were no sequelae from the trauma. To everyone's relief, besides a mild headache and some confused memories of the accident, Emily was recovering extraordinarily well. Robert didn't leave the hospital a single day. His cell phone kept ringing incessantly, but now remained silent inside the drawer of the bedside table. The corporate world that once consumed every second of his existence now seemed distant and insignificant. "Dad," Emily called on a quiet afternoon while drawing in her sketchbook, "why did you never tell me about Grandma, about her being an art restorer?" Robert, who was attentively observing every stroke his daughter made on the paper, felt a lump in his throat. I guess it hurt too much to talk about her. Colors heal pain, Theo pronounced from his improvised perch near the window. Emily smiled at the parrot. He's different since I woke up. More wise. Don't you find the things he says strange? Asked Robert, still intrigued by the bird's mysterious messages. Theo has always been special, Emily replied, adding soft shadows to her drawing. But I think he was waiting for you to be ready to listen. Robert observed the new drawing taking shape under his daughter's skilled hands. It was himself, but not the businessman in an impeccable suit. It was him as he was now, with his unshaven beard, sleeves rolled up, sitting next to her bed. Have you always drawn me? He asked, noticing the refined technique in the strokes. Always, she replied without taking her eyes off the paper. Even when you weren't there, especially when you weren't there. Guilt tightened his chest, but before he could respond, Sarah entered the room carrying an old box. Look what I found while cleaning the attic, she announced, placing the box on the bed. These are your mother's old restoration tools, Robert. I thought Emily would like to see them. Carefully, Robert opened the box he hadn't seen in decades. The smell of old paints and varnish brought a wave of memories. His mother working on centuries-old canvases, patiently explaining about pigments and techniques, her gentle smile when he showed interest in learning. Art is a bridge between souls, Theo pronounced, flying close to the box. Emily picked up an old brush, gently running her fingers through the bristles. Can you teach me what she taught you, Dad? Robert felt something awaken inside him. A long, dormant connection, a talent repressed by decades of numbers and spreadsheets. I can try, he replied, his voice choked with emotion. Lost time returns in new colors, said Theo, now perched on Emily's shoulder. Sarah watched the scene with tears in her eyes. It was the first time in years she had seen Robert and Emily truly connected, united by something deeper than family obligations. There's a blank canvas in my room, Emily commented, her eyes shining with expectation. When I get out of here, can we paint something together? Robert looked at his daughter, really looked, and saw not only the talented artist she had become, but also the little girl who had always waited for a moment like this with her father. It would be an honor, he replied, and for the first time in years his smile reached his eyes. Theo gently flapped his wings, spreading some colorful feathers over the bed. The mirror rebuilds itself, he said, his melodious voice echoing through the room. The day of Emily's hospital discharge arrived with a mixture of relief and apprehension. Robert, who in the last few weeks had practically moved into the hospital, now found himself facing the challenge of reintegrating into everyday life, not as the ruthless businessman he had been, but as the father he was determined to become. Are you sure you don't want me to stay with her today? Sarah asked while helping Emily pack her things. You must have a lot of work piled up. Robert shook his head. No, I want to be there. Actually, he hesitated for a moment. I asked for an extended leave from the company. I might even consider stepping away permanently. The silence that followed was broken only by the flapping of Theo's wings, who flew to Emily's shoulder. Priorities realign, said the parrot, as if approving the decision. On the way home, Robert observed Emily through the rear-view mirror. She looked out the window with fascination, as if seeing the city for the first time. Everything seems so alive, she commented, her fingers tracing invisible shapes on the glass. When they arrived at the Thompson mansion, Robert noticed how cold and impersonal the place seemed. The immaculate white walls, the designer furniture, everything screamed showroom instead of home. I think we need to give this place a new life, he commented, carrying Emily's bags. Can I paint the walls? Emily asked, a mischievous gleam in her eyes. Robert laughed, remembering the crayon incident years ago. You know what? Yes, you can. Let's turn this house into a living art gallery. Emily's eyes widened in surprise and joy. Really? Really, he confirmed. But first, how about we start with that blank canvas in your room? As they climbed the stairs, Theo flew over them, his colorful feathers contrasting with the monochromatic environment of the house. Walls sing when painted with love, the parrot pronounced. In Emily's room, the large blank canvas waited like a promise of infinite possibilities. Robert opened the box with his mother's old tools, the familiar smell of paints and varnishes filling the air. Where do we start? Asked Emily, her voice mixing anxiety and excitement. Robert picked up a brush, feeling its weight, recalling his mother's lessons. First, we need a base, something that represents a new beginning. Together, father and daughter began to cover the canvas with soft shades of blue and green, creating a background that resembled a sky at dawn. Robert was surprised at how much technique he still remembered and how natural it felt to work alongside Emily. "You have an incredible gift," he commented, observing how she mixed colors with precision. Emily smiled, a light blush on her cheeks. "I learned mostly on my own, watching videos, practicing." The realization of how much he had missed hit Robert like a punch in the stomach. How many moments like this could they have shared over the years? "The past is dry paint," Theo spoke softly, as if reading his thoughts. "The future, wet canvas." Inspired by the parrot's words, Robert dipped the brush in a vibrant red. "How about we add something bold here?" he suggested, making a broad gesture on the canvas. Emily nodded enthusiastically, and soon they were laughing and experimenting, mixing colors and techniques, letting creativity flow freely. Hours passed without them noticing, the outside world forgotten as they created their own universe on the canvas. When they finally took a step back to admire the work, both were speechless. The painting was an explosion of colors and shapes, representing a futuristic city surrounded by lush nature, a perfect balance between the world Robert knew and the one Emily dreamed of. "It's beautiful," Emily whispered, tears shining in her eyes. Robert put his arm around his daughter's shoulders, feeling a connection that went beyond words. "It's our new beginning," he said, his voice choked with emotion. Theo flew to the easel, landing gracefully next to the still wet canvas. "Art heals what time has broken," declared the parrot, his gaze alternating between father and daughter. At that moment, looking at the painting they had created together, Robert understood that he was witnessing the birth of something precious, not just a work of art, but the reconstruction of his family, painted with the colors of love, understanding, and forgiveness. As the Thompson mansion gradually transformed into a vibrant studio, the outside world didn't stop spinning. On the morning of the 10th day after Emily's discharge, the doorbell rang insistently, breaking the tranquility that had settled in the house. Robert, with paint-stained hands and wearing an old T-shirt, an unthinkable sight a few weeks ago, answered the door. Outside, Walter Peterson, the chairman of the board of Thompson Enterprises, stared at him with a mixture of shock and indignation. "Robert, for God's sake, you've vanished off the map. The company's shares have plummeted 30% since you took this absurd leave," exclaimed Walter, entering the house uninvited. Before Robert could respond, Walter stopped abruptly, mouth agape at the transformation of the mansion. The once immaculate walls now displayed colorful murals, sketches, and paintings in various stages of completion. "What the hell happened here?" asked Walter, his voice a mixture of astonishment and horror. "Art happened," Emily replied, coming down the stairs with Theo on her shoulder. "Hello, Mr. Peterson." Walter looked from Emily to Robert, clearly struggling to understand the scene before him. "Robert, we need to talk, in private." Robert hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Emily, sweetheart, can you excuse us for a few minutes?" "Of course, Dad," she replied, casting a worried look before heading back upstairs. "The walls have ears, the paints have memory," Theo pronounced before taking flight following Emily. In the office, the only room still untouched by the artistic revolution, Walter poured a series of graphs and reports onto the desk. "The company is on the brink of collapse, Robert. We need you back immediately. The market is in panic, investors are fleeing." Robert looked at the papers, the numbers that once consumed his life. Now they seemed so insignificant. "Walter," he interrupted softly, "have you ever stopped to think about what really matters in life?" The other man stared at him as if he had grown a second head. "What matters?" "Robert, we're talking about the work of a lifetime. Your legacy." Robert walked to the window, observing the garden where Emily was setting up an easel. "My true legacy is out there, Walter. And I spent years without realizing it." "You're throwing everything away because of a hobby?" Walter asked, incredulous. "It's not a hobby," Robert replied, his voice firm. "It's a reconnection with who I really am, with my family, with what truly matters." At that moment, a soft sound of wings announced Theo's arrival, who landed on the office desk. "The true empire is built with love," declared the parrot. Walter took a step back, startled. "That bird, did it just—" Robert smiled. "Theo has been teaching us a lot these past few days." Turning to Walter, he continued, "Look, I'm not abandoning the company, but I need more time. Time to be a father, to rediscover who I am beyond business." But what about the shareholders, the board?" Walter stammered. "Tell them I'm working on a new vision for the company, one that balances profit with purpose." "And if they can't wait?" Robert paused, the following words surprising even himself. "Then maybe it's time to pass the baton." Walter stared at him for long seconds, then slowly began to gather the papers. "You're different, Robert. I don't know if for better or worse, but different." When Walter left, Robert returned to the garden, where Emily was making the first strokes on a new canvas. "Is everything okay, Dad?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. Robert smiled, picking up a brush. "Never better, sweetheart. Now how about you teach me that shading technique you were practicing yesterday?" As father and daughter lost themselves in painting, Theo soared over the garden, his feathers shining in the sun. "True success is painted with the colors of the heart," he sang, his voice blending with the sound of laughter and wind in the trees. A year passed since the night of the exhibition that changed everything. The Thompson mansion, once a symbol of cold corporate power, now pulsed with life and creativity. The garden, previously meticulously pruned, had transformed into a lush oasis of inspiration, with organic sculptures and wildflower beds. Robert watched the sunrise from his new studio veranda, a steaming cup of coffee in his hands. Emily, now 17, slept peacefully after a night of intense painting. Theo, as always, was nearby, his feathers gleaming with the first lights of day. "The dawn paints new possibilities," said the parrot, his voice soft as a morning breeze. Robert smiled. "You're right. As always, my friend." The phone rang, breaking the contemplative silence. It was Walter Peterson. "Robert, the first quarter results are in. You won't believe it." Thompson Enterprises had undergone a transformation as profound as its founder. After the exhibition, Robert proposed a new direction for the company, investing in art, culture, and education. Many thought it was madness, but the results spoke for themselves. "The shares have risen 45%, Walter continued, excitement evident in his voice. "Our scholarship program for young artists is on the cover of every business magazine. Robert, you were right. Balancing purpose and profit, it's the future." After hanging up, Robert felt a familiar presence beside him. Emily, still sleepy, joined him on the veranda. "Good news?" she asked, picking up the brush she always kept nearby. "The best," he replied, watching her begin to sketch the sunrise. "You know, Emily, a year ago I thought I knew what success was. Now I realize I was just scratching the surface." Emily smiled, adding touches of vibrant orange to her canvas. "And what is success for you now, Dad?" Robert picked up another brush, joining her in painting. "It's this moment. Seeing you grow, create. It's knowing that we're making a difference, not just accumulating wealth, but enriching lives." As father and daughter painted together, capturing the ephemeral beauty of dawn, Sarah entered the veranda, bringing more coffee. "I have a surprise for you," she announced, handing over an elegant envelope. Emily opened it, her eyes widening with emotion. "I can't believe it. The Venice Biennale, they want our works there." Robert was speechless. The Venice Biennale was the pinnacle of the art world. Having their works, the paintings he and Emily created together, exhibited there was more than he had ever dreamed of. "This calls for a celebration," declared Sarah, her eyes shining with pride. That night, the Thompson mansion filled with laughter and music. Friends, family, and even some of Robert's old business partners gathered to celebrate. The garden was illuminated with colorful lamps, and blank canvases were spread all around, inviting guests to leave their mark. At the height of the party, Robert climbed onto a small, improvised platform, asking for everyone's attention. "A year ago, I thought I had everything," he began, his voice laden with emotion. "Money, power, influence, but I was empty inside. It took almost losing what really mattered to understand the true value of life." He paused, his eyes finding Emily's in the crowd. "Today, thanks to my incredible daughter, to the art I rediscovered, and yes, even to a very wise parrot," he smiled, looking at Theo, who was observing everything from his perch. "I understand that true wealth is in the connections we make, in the lives we touch, in the beauty we create together." Raising his glass, Robert concluded, "So, let's toast. To the future, to infinite possibilities, and to the art of living fully." As the guests applauded and toasted, Emily approached her father, enveloping him in a tight hug. "Thank you for painting this new future with me, Dad," she whispered. Robert hugged her back, tears of joy in his eyes. "No, my dear. Thank you for teaching me to see the colors of life again." Theo flew gracefully, landing on Robert's shoulder. With his melodious voice, the parrot pronounced what seemed to be a final blessing. The canvas of life is never complete. Each brushstroke is a choice, each color, an emotion. The true artist paints with the heart, transforming not just the canvas but the world around them. As the party continued around him, Robert Thompson, the man who was once defined only by his financial empire, now saw himself as part of a much larger work of art, a living painting of love, connection, and purpose, with infinite possibilities still to come.